didn't know my principal was spying on me until it was too late. The language that almost cost me everything. My principal had a camera in his hand the night my grandmother almost died. He wasn't calling for help. He was building a case against me. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone, and somewhere behind me, in the dark of an empty hallway, someone was watching. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what that hallway had already cost me, long before that night. Hash the rule. Our school had one rule that mattered more than every other rule combined. Speak anything other than English on school property, and you were suspended. No warnings, no exceptions. 3 days minimum, plus a permanent mark on your record that colleges and scholarship boards would see for the rest of your life. Our principal, Mr. Harris, announced it over the intercom almost every single morning like it was scripture. He claimed that months earlier he'd overheard a group of students plotting something in Spanish near the gym, and that was all the justification he needed. From that day forward, teachers didn't just watch the classrooms. They patrolled the hallways, the bathrooms, the parking lot, anywhere a kid might let their guard down and let out a single word that wasn't English. He loved to stand at the podium during assemblies and say English was the language of success. Like the 200 of us sitting there in folding chairs were somehow less than human until we proved otherwise. My family spoke Spanish at home, all of it. Every dinner, every argument, every joke, every bedtime story my grandmother ever told me, all in Spanish. So walking into that building every morning meant walking into a version of myself with half my voice cut out. Imagine holding your breath for 7 hours a day, every day, for 2 years straight. That's what it felt like. My mother stopped coming to school events entirely after a teacher corrected her accent in front of a room full of other parents during a PTA meeting. She never said it hurt her. She just stopped showing up. I noticed. I never told her I noticed. Kids all over that school were doing the same thing I was, hanging up on parents mid-call rather than risk answering in their first language. The Puerto Rican kids, the Vietnamese kids, the Haitian kids, all of us walking those halls like ghosts of ourselves, our real voices trapped behind our teeth. One of my friends got suspended for calling out abuela to his grandmother when she picked him up from the front circle. Another kid, a quiet junior who'd never been in trouble a day in his life, lost an entire scholarship offer because he cursed in French after stubbing his toe on a bench. One word. That's all it took. I had my own reason to be terrified of that rule, more than almost anyone. My grandmother lived with us. She only spoke Spanish, not a word of English, not even simple things like yes or hello. And her heart had been getting worse for over a year. She had a specific medication she needed, and an allergy so severe that the wrong pill could kill her in minutes. My mother worked 40 minutes away at a warehouse, and her shift didn't let her keep her phone on her most days, which meant, by default, I was the emergency contact. Me, a 16-year-old kid, holding my grandmother's life in my back pocket every single day I sat in a classroom that would suspend me the second I tried to speak the only language that could save her. Hash the system. 2 years without a single suspension. That's how long I'd managed to survive. 2 years of building an entire secret language just to stay invisible. When my grandmother called during lunch, I'd answer with nothing but MHM and no, making it sound like I was mid-conversation with someone speaking English nearby, while she rattled off whatever she needed to tell me in Spanish on the other end. Once, during passing period, she called after a minor fall in the kitchen. I had to duck into a bathroom stall and stand there answering her questions with only yes or no, terrified that someone patrolling the hallway would hear even a single Spanish syllable slip out. My grandmother and I built a tapping code, of all things. 3 taps on my phone screen meant, take your medicine. 4 meant, call mom right now. It took me 15 minutes once just to confirm she was okay without saying a single word to her, and I still walked into chemistry class 8 minutes late. But I hadn't gotten suspended. That was the only victory that mattered. My grandmother knew about the rule. She tried, in her own way, to only call during real emergencies. But she was old, and sometimes she forgot or got confused about the time or just wanted to hear my voice. So my neighbor and I built a backup system. If something felt urgent, she'd text me first, and I'd know to slip off school property before calling back. It worked. For a while, it actually worked. Until the day it didn't. Hash the call. I was sitting in history class, half listening to a lecture on the Cold War, when my phone buzzed against my leg. Once. I ignored it. I always waited a beat before checking, just in case a teacher's eyes drifted my way. It buzzed again, and again. By the time I finally looked, under the cover of my desk, I counted 12 missed calls, all from my neighbor. The same neighbor who, in years of this system, had never called more than twice in a row. My stomach dropped somewhere around call number 15. I sat there frozen for one full, agonizing minute as the number kept climbing. 18, 22, 25 missed calls, stacking up in real time while I sat perfectly still in a plastic chair, pretending to take notes on the Berlin Wall. The second my teacher turned to write on the whiteboard, I slid out of my seat and slipped into the hallway. I called back with my back against the wall, my whole body shaking before I even heard her voice. She was screaming, not talking, screaming in Spanish, so fast I could barely keep up. My grandmother had collapsed in the kitchen. She was barely breathing. The paramedics were already there, but nobody could understand what my neighbor was trying to tell them, and she couldn't translate the exact name of my grandmother's heart medication fast enough. Worse, the medication she needed sounded almost identical to the one she was deathly allergic to. In her panic, my neighbor kept mixing up the names. I tried the tap code. She was crying too hard to notice her phone buzzing. I tried typing the medication name in a text. She couldn't hold the phone to her ear for the paramedics and read my screen at the same time. There was no clever workaround left. No system. No safe middle ground between protecting my school record and protecting my grandmother's life. So I ran. Hash the hallway. I sprinted down that empty corridor, phone pressed against my ear, shouting directions in rapid Spanish. Bathroom cabinet, third shelf, behind the vitamins, white bottle, not the blue one. The blue one will kill her, my neighbor screaming back at me. The paramedics somewhere on speaker. None of us speaking the same language at the same time. My neighbor didn't know English. The paramedics didn't know Spanish. Somewhere in the middle of that hallway, sprinting toward the exit doors, I became the only bridge holding all three of us together. I have no memory of which language I used for which word. Medical terms tumbled out of me in whatever order my brain could grab them. Cardiac, corazon, allergica, allergic, my mouth moving faster than my mind could track. I didn't notice him at first. Principal Harris was standing near the main entrance the entire time, watching, phone raised, screen glowing, recording every single word. He didn't move to help. He didn't ask if everything was okay. He just stood there, expression completely flat, capturing evidence of a rule violation while a 16-year-old kid fought to keep his grandmother alive over the phone 20 feet away from him. She survived, barely. The paramedics, thanks to the details I managed to translate in time, knew exactly which medication to withhold. The ER doctor said afterward, plainly, that if they'd given her the wrong one, she would have been dead within minutes. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought saving someone's life might actually count for something in that building. I was wrong, and what happened next was so much worse than I expected. Hash the ambush. The next morning, I walked into first period and stopped cold in the doorway. Principal Harris was already sitting at my teacher's desk. Laptop open. The entire class dead silent, staring at me like I'd already been convicted of something. He turned the laptop screen toward me without a word. Hallway security footage, audio perfectly clear, me sprinting past the cameras shouting in Spanish. "Would you like to explain," he said, voice calm in the worst possible way, "why you thought you were exempt from our English-only policy?" My legs felt like they'd been filled with wet concrete. My mouth went dry. There was a suspension form sitting on the desk between us, my name already typed at the top in black ink, filled out before I'd said a single word in my defense. He hadn't come to ask me anything. He'd come to perform a verdict he'd already reached the night before. I told him about the medication, the allergy, the paramedics who couldn't understand a word without me. He held up one hand before I could finish. Emergencies don't override school policy. You could have found another way. There was no other way. I'd spent 2 years building other ways, and none of them worked when someone's heart stopped in real time. "Can I call my mom?" I asked. He shook his head, slow and deliberate. "She'll need to speak English during school hours or bring an approved interpreter." The whole class shifted in their seats. Nobody said a word. Even asking for help came with rules attached. He pulled a thick packet from his desk drawer, pages of policy, highlighted in yellow, and slid it across to me. My disciplinary hearing was scheduled for Thursday. I had the right to bring a parent, but the entire hearing, he made sure to specify, would be conducted in English only. The bell rang. Everyone rushed out without meeting my eyes. I sat there alone with that packet in my hands, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I understood something I hadn't let myself fully admit before. This wasn't really about English. This was about power, and I had just become his example. Hash the watching eyes. Word spread through that school faster than I could keep up with. By second period, kids were already whispering. By lunch, someone had started a rumor that I'd broken the rule on purpose, some kind of political stunt for attention. By the end of the day, half the school thought I was a hero, and the other half thought I was a liar who'd staged the whole emergency. The truth, apparently, wasn't dramatic enough to spread on its own. I sat in the front office for the rest of the day, told to stay put, until dismissal. When the secretary handed me a blank form and told me to write my official statement, I stared at that line for what felt like an hour. Every sentence I wrote sounded wrong. How do you explain in formal English, in perfect grammar, that your grandmother's life mattered more than a rule written by a man who never once had to translate a word to keep someone breathing? I asked if I could get a copy of the hallway recording. The secretary didn't even look up. That's internal evidence. Students can't access it. My stomach dropped like the floor had opened beneath me. They had proof of everything, and I wasn't allowed to even look at it. That's when the kid sitting across from me, waiting for something of his own, leaned over and whispered something that changed everything. "The hallway cameras have audio," he said quietly. "But so does Harris's personal phone. My cousin works it here. He said Harris has been walking around filming random hallway moments for weeks, building a file. Nobody knows why." I felt my pulse jump. Weeks. He'd been doing this for *weeks, long before my grandmother ever collapsed. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a principal happening to catch a rule violation in real time. He'd been hunting for one. Hash the pattern. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed running through everything Harris had ever said in assembly, every warning, every announcement, trying to figure out why a grown man would spend weeks secretly filming teenagers in hallways, just waiting for someone to slip. The next morning, during lunch, I started quietly asking around. Not about my own case, about the rule itself. Had anyone else been caught the same way, filmed without knowing? The stories came faster than I expected, and each one made my chest tighter than the last. A girl in my grade lost her spot in National Honor Society after answering her mother's call in Vietnamese in an empty stairwell. A stairwell, it turned out, with a camera angled directly at it. A boy 2 grades below me said his parents stopped coming to his basketball games because they were terrified of accidentally speaking French near school property and getting him in trouble. One family missed a relative's funeral entirely because they couldn't coordinate childcare without risking a phone call in their first language. Every single story followed the same pattern, a private moment caught on camera used as leverage. Not safety, leverage. I started writing everything down. Times, locations, which kids. I didn't fully know what I was building yet. But some instinct told me I needed proof of the pattern before Thursday's hearing, or none of this would matter. Then, 2 days before my hearing, something happened that turned this from a personal nightmare into something much bigger. Hash the video. A classmate I barely knew messaged me a video file with no explanation except, "You need to see this." I opened it standing in the school parking lot, hands cold before I even pressed play. It wasn't the official hallway security footage. It was shot from someone's own phone, off to the side, catching something the security cameras never would have. Principal Harris, standing by the main entrance the night of my grandmother's emergency. Not the school's camera system, his own personal phone, held up, deliberately angled at me while I ran past shouting in Spanish. This wasn't a principal enforcing a policy he happened to catch on security footage. This was a man who had personally, intentionally, filmed a student in the middle of a medical emergency and said nothing, offered no help, called no one, just recorded, like he'd been waiting his whole career for a moment exactly like this one. My hands shook as I forwarded it straight to Orlando Frey, the school counselor who'd been the only adult in that building who actually listened to me since this whole thing started. He called me within 10 minutes. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it, quiet, careful, like he was choosing every word. "I need you to bring this to the hearing," he said, "and I need you to trust me on something else. I think there's more going on here than just this policy. I think Harris has a reason for all this that none of us know yet." I asked him what he meant. He hesitated. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to find out before Thursday." Hash the offer. The night before my hearing, someone knocked on our front door I never expected to see standing there. Mike Fair, the assistant principal, stood on our porch holding a manila folder like it was a peace offering. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from doing something you don't fully believe in for a long time. He said he had a final offer. If I signed a paper agreeing never to publicly discuss the language policy, or the video, or any of it, ever, in any form, my punishment would quietly disappear. No suspension, no mark on my record, no mention at the hearing at all. The paper sat on our kitchen table between us. For about 2 full seconds, I actually considered it. I was exhausted. My grades were slipping. My mother was losing hours at work just to be there for me. Signing that paper meant this could all just end tonight. But it also meant staying silent while every other kid in that building kept living exactly the way I had, half-voiced, terrified, alone. I thought about my grandmother, sitting in her chair the night before, telling me in Spanish to speak the truth no matter what it cost me. I told Mike no. He didn't look surprised. He just folded the paper back into his briefcase, said, "I figured," and walked back to his car without another word. Something about the way he said it, "I figured," stuck with me. Like he already knew, deep down, which side of this he wished he was standing on. Hash the walkout. Word about the second video, the one of Harris filming me instead of helping, spread through the school faster than anything else had that entire year. By the next morning, it wasn't just whispers in the hallway anymore. It was everywhere. A group of juniors I'd never even spoken to messaged me before first period, asking if I'd support a walkout the morning of my hearing. They wanted to stand outside the front entrance in silence, holding signs, timed exactly with when the district car was supposed to pull up. Part of me wanted to say yes so badly it scared me. After 2 years of shrinking myself smaller and smaller in that building, the idea of 40 kids standing shoulder to shoulder because of what happened to my grandmother, and me felt like something I didn't know I was allowed to want. But I said no. I messaged back, one by one, telling every single kid who reached out to please not risk it. A walkout meant automatic suspensions for every one of them. No hearing, no review, just an immediate mark on records that some of them, unlike me, might never get cleared. Scholarship kids. Kids on academic probation who couldn't afford one more infraction. Kids whose parents worked jobs like my mother's, where missing time to fight a suspension wasn't an option. This was my fight. I wasn't going to let it become the reason someone else lost something they couldn't get back. Not everyone listened. Word got to me an hour before the hearing that a handful of freshmen had gathered by the flagpole anyway, quiet, just standing there, saying nothing, doing nothing that technically broke a single rule. No signs, no chanting, just presence. I don't know if Harris ever found out that was connected to me. I never asked. But walking past that flagpole on my way inside, seeing 5 kids I barely knew standing there in complete silence, was the first moment all week I didn't feel like I was fighting this alone in an empty room. The second scare. 3 hours before the hearing was scheduled to start, my phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor that stopped my heart cold for the second time that month. Come home. Now she's not responding right. Not another collapse, not exactly. But my grandmother had woken up confused, unable to recognize where she was for almost a full minute, mixing up words even in Spanish, the one language that had never once failed her in 81 years. I called my mother in a panic, already halfway to grabbing my backpack to leave school property, hearing rules be damned. My mother, on her lunch break at the warehouse, told me to wait. She was already in her car, already driving, already going to be there faster than I could get across town without a license. I sat in the school library, unable to focus on anything, staring at my phone and refusing to put it away even when a teacher told me to. 20 of the longest minutes of my life passed before my mother finally texted back. She's okay. Blood sugar crashed, that's all. She's stable. Go to your hearing. I nearly cried with relief right there in the library, in front of people I didn't know. And for one terrifying second, I didn't care who saw or heard whatever language came out of my mouth first. But it rattled something loose in me. My grandmother wasn't just fighting one bad heart. She was getting older, more fragile, more unpredictable by the week. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought I hadn't let myself fully look at settled in, this policy wasn't a one-time problem I just needed to survive once. If nothing changed, I was going to be back in this exact position again. Maybe soon, maybe worse. That thought is what walked into the hearing room with me an hour later, steadier than I expected to feel. The hearing. The morning of the hearing, I could barely eat breakfast. My mother sat across from me in her best work clothes, the ones she saved for parent-teacher conferences, and neither of us said much. There wasn't much left to say that we hadn't already said a dozen times that week. Orlando showed up early, wearing a button-down I'd never seen him in. He looked nervous in a way that made me more nervous. When I asked if everything was okay, he just said, "We'll talk after." We walked to the school together. The conference room was already set up when we got there, long table, Harris seated at the head with his laptop open, and a stack of folders beside him, Mike Fair to his left with a legal pad, and a woman I didn't recognize sitting across from him wearing a district badge on her lanyard. My old sophomore English teacher sat quietly near the wall as the teacher representative. No interpreter, despite my formal request weeks earlier. Harris didn't look up for a full minute after we sat down. When he finally did, his face was completely blank, like we were about to discuss attendance statistics instead of my entire future. He played the hallway footage first. 3 full minutes of me running, shouting, switching languages mid-sentence. Then he read the charge aloud in the flattest voice I'd ever heard, willful, deliberate defiance of school policy. I confirmed everything. Yes, I spoke Spanish. Yes, on school property. And then I told them exactly why the medication, the allergy, the paramedics who couldn't understand a word without me standing there translating in real time. Harris didn't blink. The letter doesn't change the fact that a clear policy was broken. Exceptions undermine the entire system. That's when I slid the second video across the table. Not the security footage, the other one. The one showing Harris himself, standing at that entrance, phone raised, recording instead of helping. For the first time since I'd walked into that room, his jaw tightened. The district representative picked it up without a word and watched the whole thing twice. The reveal. What happened next, I didn't see coming, not even after everything. Orlando stood up, quiet, steady, like he'd been holding this in for days. "Before this goes any further," he said, "there's something the district needs to know about Mr. Harris's history with this policy." Harris's face changed for the first time all morning. Not anger, something closer to fear. Orlando explained that after seeing the personal phone video, he'd started digging, not into me, but into Harris. Public records, Old district files. A previous school 2 counties over where Harris had worked over a decade earlier. There had been a complaint back then too, almost identical. A language policy Harris had personally pushed through as a junior administrator, aimed almost entirely at immigrant families. The complaint was filed by a parent whose child had missed answering a family emergency call because of that exact rule. The case had been quietly settled. Harris had been transferred, not fired. And somehow, years later, he'd built almost the exact same policy in a brand new school, like nothing had ever happened. The room went completely silent. I don't know if it was guilt or exposure, or just the sinking realization that this time, the paperwork couldn't disappear quietly. But Harris didn't say a single word in his own defense for almost a full minute. The district representative closed her laptop halfway and said she'd need to pause the hearing to review this new information before any final decision could be made. It wasn't a win, not yet. But for the first time, I watched the ground shift under someone who had never once had to answer for anything in his life. What came after. The official ruling, when it finally came 2 days later, wasn't the clean victory I'd imagined lying awake at night. 1 day of in-school suspension, reduced from 3. My record flagged as under review instead of permanently marked. The district opened a formal investigation into both the English-only policy and Harris's prior history at his old school. It wasn't everything, but it wasn't nothing either. 2 weeks after that, an email went out to every school in the district. A new policy, an emergency language exception for medical situations, for safety, for exactly the kind of moment that had almost cost my grandmother her life. Harris stood at an assembly and read it out loud in the most narrow, reluctant way a person could possibly read good news, but it was still real, still permanent, still more than what existed before. The scholarship committee sent me a letter a month later saying my record had been cleared following the district review, and my application would move forward as originally submitted. I read that email standing in my kitchen and had to sit down before I could finish it. I still don't know exactly what happened to Harris. He's still principal, for now quieter than before, less visible in the hallways, like something in him finally understood he was being watched too. Whether that lasts, whether the investigation into his old school ever goes further, I genuinely don't know. Some nights I wonder if it will ever fully close. If a man who built the same policy twice, in 2 different schools, over more than a decade, really stops after one hearing. But every afternoon, my grandmother still sits in her chair by the window, watching her Spanish soap opera, completely unaware of most of what happened on her behalf. I never told her about the hearing in detail. I never told her about the videos, or Orlando's discovery, or how close I came to signing that paper and staying silent forever. I just sit next to her some evenings, let her run her fingers through my hair like she used to when I was small, and speak to her, fully, easily, in the language that almost cost me everything, and somehow, in the end, gave me back the one thing that rule tried hardest to take away. My voice. Like and subscribe for more videos like these. Thanks for watching.